Welcome to the Growth Over Grades podcast, a show connecting you with thought leaders, pioneers, and change agents who are leading the charge to support schools and districts in making the shift toward competency-based education and to promote growth over grades. I'm Jordan Lewis, and on the show today, we have Associate Professor, Academic Program Director, and Faculty Lead for Social and Emotional Learning for National University, Dr. Maggie Broderick. Amongst the many hats Dr. Broderick wears, she is also the director of NU's Advanced Research Center and the editor of the Journal of Online Graduate Education. With more than 20 years in education, including 8 years of teaching experience in Pittsburgh Public Schools, she brings a wealth of knowledge to her work. She's a true champion of lifelong learning, passionate about teaching at all levels, and has dedicated her career to helping students and fellow educators thrive. Today, we dive deep into Dr. Broderick's work, including her insights into social emotional learning, creating a sense of belonging in every classroom, how schools and districts can effectively integrate SEL into core curriculum, and how she fosters a culture of collaboration to ensure that each student has the opportunity for excellence, regardless of the educational setting. Now, to my conversation with Dr. Maggie Broderick. Maggie, welcome to the show. We're incredibly grateful to have you on Growth Over Grades. I know that today's topic is one that is front and center in mind for many of our educators with the current climate and everything that's going on within public education these days. And I would say, being in education over the last probably 5 years, this topic that we're covering has really picked up a lot of steam of importance and critical nature towards our school system. So I wanted to just start off by saying thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and we're really excited to have you.
Oh, thanks so much, Jordan. I'm glad to be here. Great to connect with you all and to chat. Like you said, it's important to think about these things today. So very happy to be here.
Yeah, and to kind of start things off here today, Maggie, we're going to be talking a lot about social and emotional learning, but just for those listeners that may be a little bit more green to what this means, can you just help us dive into the definition in your sense of what does it mean to have a sense of belonging within the context of social and emotional learning, and why is this so crucial for our student development today?
Sure. Well, I can get into more of the specifics of sort of frameworks later on. I like to geek out, as I like to say, and go into all kinds of interesting research-based stuff. But I'd like to start off with the idea that sense of belonging, it's really a feeling, right? And so we can get really tripped up in our world as teachers and administrators, and really a lot of things in our world with quantitative measures. And I know your podcast centers around that. We overuse that sometimes, and they're important, but sense of belonging is one of those things you can't exactly quantify, right? When you think about it, classrooms and schools, they're full of people, just like any other place in your daily life. And you know it when you feel it. If you walk into a place and you feel good about being there, it's very different than when you don't. So, I think about my kids. If they're eager, they get up, they're like, I'm ready to go. It's very different than when they have that sense of dread. So I have a story I can share about that from my perspective as a parent. But I think if you think about the reasons that might be while you're listening to this story, it's kind of powerful because, why would you feel that sense of dread when you wake up versus that sense of like, oh boy, good day, right? Or a mix. And so this week or the last few weeks in my house, I have a couple of older kids, young adults, that sort of thing, and they've learned to drive. They have gotten their license. Yay, very exciting. And they wanted to. They're like super motivated. They wanted to. But then it's like, okay, we've got to go to the DMV. This is part of the game. You got to do it. You got to take that test. You got to pass that test. And it's not something anybody really looks forward to, the part of actually being in that DMV. And they're not great sometimes. I'm sure there's a couple that are good, but and so we do it because we have to, and we're motivated for that end result. But you might be anxious or confused and feeling some not so great friendliness from employees, or sometimes they're good. But in contrast, this week my kids were like, "Mom, the farmer's market. We got to go to the farmer's market." And they wanted to actually drive there too, which is an aside. But they woke up saying, Mom, get out of bed. We want to go. Because what do they feel like when they go to the farmer's market? I mean, they need food, just like they need that license, and they want food, just like they want that license. But what do we find at a farmer's market? It smells so good. Our senses light up. There's colors, flowers, food, new things each week. great traditions, some possibilities for their cooking and baking, so things they like to do. People are smiling and enjoying and they're relaxed. It's outside. You might see a friend or hear music, or maybe my kids will spend a little money and have that empowerment on their own of, hey, I'm going to pick up my favorite bread and my favorite pie, my favorite vegetable even, right? And they also see dogs, which they love dogs, right? So they feel this ownership, this control. Their bodies, their emotions immediately relax and say, hey, I feel so good at the farmer's market. And they don't feel that at the DMV, even though they really want that license. So, our senses and our emotions tell us if something feels friendly, safe, nice, fun, and it's motivating and encouraging. And we also know the opposite. Hey, I have to do it, but I don't feel so good. Classrooms and schools are the same. It feels inviting. If you want to be there, you want to go there, you feel it on that personal, visceral level. So I can talk more about SEL later, but it just feels, it's that kind of same feeling, right? Do I wake up going, I want to do this today? It feels good inside of my soul, or do I feel a sense of dread,
Right. And it just makes me think of the anecdote of you get the Sunday scaries before you have to head back into your work week. And, I appreciated that story a lot, Maggie, because I, as an avid Saturday morning farmers market individual myself, started thinking about all the reasons why I love to go to the farmers market. And it just had me also thinking back to my time when I was in school, both as a teacher, but as a student, and the different feeling that you would have as a student when you walked into different classrooms. As a big music student, the feeling I would get of joy and jubilation when I would walk into that music classroom, knowing for the next 75 minutes that I felt incredibly comfortable and welcoming, and that I was going to thrive in that environment, and that I was not going to be judged in that environment, versus when I would walk into my 11th grade math classroom and you had that sense of, you're scared to be put on the spot and have to answer that question in front of the whole classroom. So I really appreciated that because it's incredibly relatable. But also, Maggie, what really stood out to me was how you talked about our schools focusing so much on measuring everything, but you can't, how do you measure an individual student's sense of belonging, right? Like, how do you help that student feel like, am I safe in this space or not? Do I feel welcome in this space or not? And it's a really big challenge that I know a lot of our listeners are trying to combat to make those students feel safe.
Exactly.
And I'm curious, because I think it's a perfect segue to just speak a bit more broadly about social and emotional learning. So in your own words, Maggie, how would you describe social and emotional learning in broader terms? And I'm really curious, once we define that, to just talk about the importance and significance for 21st century teaching and learning.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I let you know, I'm a parent, right? So my kids are 23, 19, and 14. So it's an adventure, and it has been this whole time. And when we think about the 21st century, it's kind of incredible. When I think back to starting out as a parent for my 23-year-old, wow, the technology has changed immensely. We did not have smartphones. He used DVDs on a small thing to view them. We had, even VHS tapes. He remembers Blockbuster. Okay. And then my younger one it's only a 10 years difference-ish, somewhere around 10 years difference for my oldest and my youngest. No, none of that, right? It has moved here to this world where my youngest has only seen a world with smartphones, only seen a world with mobile technology, and all of the things that we have, social media, just the things since, maybe the last 10 to 15 years have been huge parts of our lives, and we spend lots of time in that space. So we absolutely have to, look at that within that lens of how this has changed immensely in just, let's say, 20, 25 years. So when we think about SEL within that context, SEL really is just things that a lot of people already do. If they are, let's say a teacher, but it could be a parent or just a human being. It's not just about teachers at all, and it's not just about schools at all. It's something where you might already be doing that, but we have a framework now to describe that. So when I think back to my own teaching in the 1990s, before I had kids specifically, and I still teach now, but more in the K through 5 school where I was teaching, I could say that I was doing some of these things just because it felt right to me. It felt like the right thing to do. I was doing a lot of things that weren't great either. I had a lot to learn, but some of the things from SEL, I think I knew inside of myself, and a lot of teachers do. A lot of teachers go into it because that is part of them anyway. So it's natural. But now we have like a framework. So we maybe didn't realize what it was. Now we say things like, having empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, creating and maintaining a sense of belonging, being sensitive, and being able to kind of like flex to someone with your disposition and your style. We now have a framework to just define that, right? We can do research. We can talk about what are these things, So one way of doing that, a framework is CASEL. A lot of people are familiar with CASEL, right? The CASEL framework. Another one, sort of a little bit more holistic beyond that, is whole child education through the Learning Policy Institute. And there are many others. There are lots of other ways of looking at it. And, you see different ways that they're either implemented or infused into a school or a classroom. And teachers do all kinds of different things. But basically, it's intrapersonal and interpersonal, knowing things about yourself and knowing and trying to understand things about others and understand things about yourself. Self-awareness is key. I did a chapter about 3 years ago with my colleague, Amy Lynn, who is an excellent expert on these things and has done a lot in the schools. And, we came to that nugget that being aware of yourself in your inter and intrapersonal stuff is really what we need. And with that in mind, it's really about that whole child, right? So it's not, when you think about a child, it's not just a younger child. This could be my 14-year-old. This could be, somebody who's about to finish high school. Thinking about that, it's not just about cognition. It's not just about learning the curriculum, which is absolutely important, but the cognition piece goes along with other things in development, and all those stages of development. So these sort of cyclical things with our bodies, our physical selves, our emotional selves, our mental health, and our social awareness and our social relationships, all these things. Sometimes these happen asynchronously. Sometimes you might have a kid who's really ahead on the cognitive part and is struggling with other part, or vice versa. Kinds of stuff. So we've got to meet them where they are. And I love how the name of your podcast, it really speaks volumes, the growth piece of that, growth over the grades, because it's holistic. It's just really holistic, thinking about that whole child. Why are we there in the schools, the classrooms? Are we there to just do these grades and these checklists and say, to what end? College, job? Sure, yeah, but there's so much more. It should be bigger, right? So it's thinking about that and not losing sight of that foundational piece, which is really connecting with others and connecting with yourself.
I love the idea of, this interconnected framework that's going to help students distinction, and have knowing yourself, I think is critical. And when I think about how it plays into the bigger picture of helping our students get ready to go into that next phase of their life, whatever that's going to look like. If you don't know yourself, how are you going to relate it to your interests and passions and find a pathway that's right? So for everybody that is here talking or looking for support around future readiness or preparedness for students, well, if the students don't know themselves, how are they going to be able to map out those factors? Because there's going to be a huge gap. But also the call out of knowing others, I think, is also super critical. And we start thinking about a lot of these frameworks and initiatives like the Portrait of a Graduate, for example, which so heavily lean into those transferable competencies for success of the future. And you mentioned it, like how you empathize with others, and how you're going to collaborate with others, and how you're going to, build that essential critical skill for the future. Is all connected, right? And Maggie, I would love to just hear your 2 cents on educators that are looking at this almost in a siloed setting, right? Like, hey, we have to do SEL, so I'm going to have my SEL block, right? And then I'm going to do English and math afterward, instead of integrating it and making it whole. And it makes me just think about intentionality. So how can educators start to intentionally create these spaces where we can embed these SEL frameworks, because they are defined and they're there for folks now, but also just create more welcoming environments and spaces. So like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, you just really got my brain thinking about what you noted about collaboration, and I have a lot to share about sort of those spaces. But when we think about sort of why, what you noted earlier, I'm not an anthropologist by any measure, but I'm always kind of interested in this. And like when we think about why humans have been successful throughout all of our existence, it's because we know how to communicate and collaborate, right? We find ways to use language to say, hey, I figured out how to start fires. Hey, I started how to cook meat. I figured out how to stay safe from this problem. I've figured out not to eat these things. I will get sick. And we share the information, and that is, my understanding, is a very novice understanding of anthropology. Why we're successful. So we want to nurture that, and within classrooms, doing that is just a human thing to do. And so, like you said about creating those spaces, it's thinking about that whole child and thinking about those natural elements of being a human being, right? It's not just about me passing this test. It's about, okay, how can I work with others somewhere, somehow, in a meaningful way to do something much bigger than myself. So I think about that a lot in a couple of contexts. Currently writing some curriculum, thinking about that idea of the whole child. And often younger teachers of younger learners will use that phrase. They'll say, oh, teaching the whole child, early childhood. But it really is not just the whole child, and it's not just the whole younger child. It's your calculus student. It's your example of the 11th grade math classroom, and it's adults. So at National University, where I am, faculty, we talk about whole human education, and then we're thinking about whole child education really holistically. Some of our learners there, it's online, and so the learners are choosing it because it's they're busy. Right. So they want something that fits into their life because they might be military, and they're also, maybe they're having a job full time, and they have a spouse, and they have kids, and they have all these other things that they're doing, and they're trying to fit in school. So we're trying to give them, meet those needs. It's for adults too. But the way you do that, whether you're talking about those little kids or those adults, you exactly hit it on the head, is the trust, right? Trusted adults, trusted others, trusted mentors. If you don't have that, then you could have that lovely thing I mentioned of this farmer's market smells lovely and looks lovely and it's pretty, but you need that trust. I trust this person to, when something happens, to understand and meet me with empathy. So I think about that also with researching K-12 schools, sort of like you said about the music classroom. Actually, I've been doing some book chapters and some work on teachers who teach those little hidden pockets, right? Like for me, it was band. I am a flute player and I loved it. And I'm still in a choir to this day, many years later. And I do get exactly what you talked about. So I trust those people in that space. Why? It feels safe to me. I can be myself, right? So I've been trying to get more of the stories of teachers in these spaces, teachers of the arts, teachers, music particularly, because that's my thing. Often it's foreign language. Sometimes it's, very specialized things. My middle child is a STEM kid, and she bloomed and blossomed in, in engineering magnet school. So for her, it was that very specialized thing within a public school. So, it's like a hidden oasis is what I put in my last chapter. Like, how do we have these spaces? Sometimes it's because it's that trusted person. Maybe they see them for 4 years, like the band director, and they can develop trust, right? There's a lot of things, and I'd like to tease some of those out and understand what it is, because sometimes it's a feeling. How do we define that? That's really hard to do sometimes.
Absolutely. And it makes me just think about the teacher's role in building relationships and taking the time and effort to get to know those students, where we don't, as a teacher, know what's the environment at home of where that student is. And the reality a lot of the time is, perhaps that student is coming to school and mom is a single parent, or father is a single parent. I should say guardian. Guardian is a single parent. They are working 2 jobs, and the student is taking care of younger sister. So when they come to school, the trusted adult in that classroom is helping to nourish what they may not be receiving at home, for example, right? And it's all about, in my opinion, when I think back and why I have certain teachers that continue to stand out as teachers of excellence in my academic career, it was the ones that spent that 5 minutes talking to me in the hallway, asked me about my extracurricular activity, and took a little bit of that effort to get to know me as a student. And then it begins to move forward because I'm then more open and I share more with them. And then you build that relationship over time. And I can even recall, Maggie, when I was classroom teaching in my first 3 months of being a classroom teacher for the first time, you're just trying to hit on curriculum items and you're just trying to get through the day, and it's a whirlwind. And those students that are looking back at you, you're not thinking of them as an individual sitting there. It's the 35 students in my classroom represented in that grade book. And it took me a long time. And now when I work with school teams to say, it's not like these students are not just a number in the grade book. They are young, fostering individuals. And it is work for teachers to build that relationship. But once you can do that, that's when you're going to build these amazing moments. And that's when you're going to really get through to those students and make them feel like they are welcome and safe in your classroom space.
It's powerful. That's what they remember. I've read articles and shared articles time and time again with teachers in my teacher education role, where I say, hey, you don't remember exactly this part of the curriculum. Maybe it's useful, maybe it isn't. You remember how they made you feel. How did you feel with that teacher? How did they make you feel? That's dispositional, it's relational, relationships, it's all of that, and trust, all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you want to snap to that sort of sentiment. But kind of switching gears here just slightly, because I feel like for the listeners, and as you've mentioned, SEL is something that it's not a brand new concept, but it's now defined. And I feel like with the definition and the frameworks that have been put in place, it has put this not necessarily under a microscope, but to the forefront of our classrooms. And we know the current climate around social and emotional learning in North American education systems is really complex right now. So Maggie, from your perspective, what are some of the main reasons that you're finding social and emotional learning is sort of almost in the crosshairs?
Yeah. You have me reminiscing on something I was just saying to some teachers the other day. I don't quote Shakespeare often, but a rose by any other name. There's something like this, right? We can have all different names for the same thing, and people get so hung up on names for things, especially right now here in the U.S. And we're just kind of in a moment where that's happening a lot, And so it's interesting to step back and think, hey, this is something I probably did in the 90s. It wasn't called this. Very interesting to reflect upon where we are there with, what we call things. But a while back, I was on another podcast, and we were really chatting a lot about sort of the idea that it matters where you are. In the U.S. here, I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I have family in New Jersey. I know people in Florida. I have students in Texas. I mean, we're all over. My partner's from California. And there's a lot of different things. It's diverse not only in the ways we might think about diversity on the surface, but diverse from state to state and community to community. It's very interesting to try to come upon agreed definitions. And so it matters where you are, and things are changing a lot. And so there's confusion about which way we're headed on all sorts of topics. And SEL's, like you said, one of those, along with DEI and things like that. And they're not all the same thing, but people will tend to, there's a lot of noise, right? Sure. A lot of noise out there, a lot of social media, a lot of sort of fervored feelings, and, for good reasons. And news outlets and angry voices that you can easily go down a rabbit hole. And I find, really, if we take a moment and just encourage ourselves and do that self-awareness and self-reflection to say, hey, why don't we find the primary source for any of this stuff? Like whatever it is I hear on a TikTok or my kids heard on a TikTok and told me about, or what is it, I saw on the news, why don't I go to the primary source? And I think a problem is that a lot of us don't. A lot of us won't even just Google, like, what is the actual main thing where this came from or what this is. CASEL is a good framework for SEL. That is a good primary source of SEL. There are others. And so, not jumping to conclusions, saying, okay, what is the core thing behind whatever I might have heard on the news or from my friend or from Facebook or whatever, TikTok, and then, take your own critical thinking to that. So I think that's an issue where, again, like in this curriculum that I'm thinking about right now, as I write some courses, we really need to revisit critical thinking, maybe differently than we even did 10 years ago. Like we thought about it, okay, how do I analyze this and this thing in my class? I'm thinking about how do we critically, think about things in society. It's a big, that's a big thing. I don't have answers there, but I think we need to revisit that and how we're looking at where we get information and how we decide our own feelings about it.
And it also makes me wonder and curious about if the individuals who are having such a loud voice around this work are the individuals who came from a school system that was very traditional and rooted in extremely firm academic measurements and outcomes. And as we are broadly trying to make shifts in our education system to say, hey, no, like we value the academics are critical, but we're seeing these broader shifts to competency-based models where we're focusing in on the skill development and the students' holistic growth over time. And, the growth over grades is important, and we're preparing them for a future that's rooted in transferable competencies. If they're struggling with this as caretakers because they came from such a measurement-driven focus, and this is kind of under the microscope a little bit, or because they just aren't understanding it as heavily as they understood the black and white math curriculum that they grew up in.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. It's interesting to think about, and different places may have had different things for them as they came up, and a lot has changed. I've talked on other podcasts about how corporal punishment was even happening when I was 5 years old in first grade. I have a really core memory of a little boy being paddled. I'll never forget it, and that was 47 years ago. I remember it very, very well. Times have really changed, and it's a lot to think about, a lot to keep up with, and just a lot.
It is, and the things are rapidly shifting. It seems every single week there's this new trend that is trying to infiltrate our system, and obviously with AI technologies coming in, it's really rapidly shifting how we're approaching teaching and learning, and it is kind of constantly evolving, and it is hard to keep up with. And it's hard to keep up with as teachers, as systems, as leaders to create policies around these new trends and systems, but then as well for families to keep up with it, and for the community to keep up with it. It definitely is a really big challenge. But all that to say, Maggie, despite these challenges, from your perspective, where do you see SEL best fitting into the daily life and operations of our schools? Because it is important, and it is something that needs to move forward and continue.
Yeah. It's an interesting time to be thinking about it. And whatever, like we said, arose by any other name, whatever way we call it, if it's SEL or dispositional or any other way you want to say it. One thing I'm finding that's really interesting is that people are looking at whether it's a packaged program with modules versus being infused, right? So I know some packaged programs that are great. And I would recommend Harmony Academy. We're affiliated with them through national, and boy, they have great stuff. Sometimes, hey, I like to have some things that are packaged too sometimes, right? But then there's the other side of the coin where you have more infusion, and hopefully the packaged curriculum can get you there. Or there are lots of ways to approach that. But that's a thing that I'm finding a lot. People want to talk about whether it's that sort of, this is 10 minutes in the day or 10 minutes in my class or 10 minutes at the school, and a module versus, is it a whole holistic, right, transformation? I'm finding a lot of people interested in that. A lot of my students are. So, if it's infusion, it's cultural, it's classroom and school climate. It's also communication. I'm finding I'm a language person in addition to the music, and the way we communicate, right? Our norms of communication, and the ways that the stuff that's interpersonal, intrapersonal there of how we use our voices together. So if we have a buy-in for a whole culture and climate in the school and in the classroom, having that trust that they brought up is so important, that sense of belonging, that infusion, that is what I think a lot of people would like to see. But then we also have, the packaged ones, which, are a great start and also can be part of that, because they're really fun and really engaging and really useful, and we're busy. And so it's not always possible. Given the current climate, sometimes it's just one teacher who's that little spark in the school trying to nurture this holistic classroom culture within a school that maybe doesn't have it. And so I can see a place for both things, right? And they can both help each other. But moving toward that goal of the whole climate, the school and classroom climate being infused instead of just packaged would be like really great. And then you have maybe some tips and tricks from those things, but it just kind of depends where you are. Like I said before, it depends on which part of the country you're in, what type of school you're in, and so many other things.
And it's interesting hearing that perspective about packaged versus infused, because to me, I think one leads to the other. I think if you're an educator who sees that gap, the package is a great way to begin that infusion. I know a lot of school teams say we want to move in this direction and they want to put all the eggs in the basket and just go tenfold. And that just becomes overwhelming. And then it can almost lead to a compliancy factor for a busy teacher in that classroom. I have to do this. But if a teacher truly believes in the infusion and they're reflective of their practice, this idea of starting with a packaged curriculum could begin that stage of, I'm going to start small. I'm going to begin to think about how it's going to work into my routine. I'm going to reflect on what was great about this, and I'm going to carry that forward. And it might take a couple of years before they get to a truly infused classroom where this is going to be sort of foundational. And I feel like, Maggie, I would love to hear your opinion on this. Perhaps some of the complex voices that we're hearing around social emotional learning today is because of this, hey, drag and drop packaged system that's being implemented where it's such a focus. And if we just got to a more infused system, maybe we wouldn't be hearing so much of this voice around SEL. Like, what's your opinion on something, on a statement as bold as that?
Yeah, I mean, we do get, this issue of compartmentalizing things so much. So not just the packaged versus not, but also the cognition versus sort of your emotional and mental, and it all goes together, right? The physical piece, if you don't have food, your brain isn't going to work so well and learn so well. It's very simple. A lot of people get hung up on that one, which to me it blows my mind. But obviously true. If I don't have breakfast, I am not going to be able to go do that 11th grade math class you're talking about. There is no way. If my emotional needs aren't met, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Sure.
So thinking about the debate a little bit more, and like you mentioned, and sort of, academic growth goes along with it, but getting people to buy into that. I've seen these billboards. I don't know if you've seen them where you are, but they have like a blue hand and a red hand and they're holding hands. And I found out what it was is that my friend said that she one side of the political, stuff. And then they partner you with someone else, maybe from a completely different place. Because like we said, we've got a very diverse country here, and you just talk on the phone. And you hear their voice. And so I thought about that. I was like, that's kind of cool. I said to my friend, it's kind of neat that you're participating in this thing. It is social emotional learning. Having empathy, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, meeting them one-to-one, reflecting on your context and experience and perspective versus theirs, which is just different. And it's okay that they're different. It's a really neat thing and good thing that they're different. So it's similar, just like we need to stop and listen to each other. And it is harder for some folks than others. We have some things in us that make us, resistant to that. But really that's the biggest part. It's that self-awareness, like we said, and having empathy. It's about sort of practicing what we preach, so to speak, and modeling that for others. So I think it goes beyond classrooms and schools. And if we can get it more in classrooms and schools, that helps the broader culture. And if it's more in the broader culture, it helps classrooms and schools. So it's not an easy, my grandma would call it a sticky wicket, I think. That's my favorite expression of hers. But, it's something that we have to think about really holistically.
Sure. And you just gave me an aha moment with that example. And as somebody who is actively looking to learn a lot more about this world, I'm not coming onto this show saying I'm an expert. If I was, that's why I have you here, Maggie, because you're the researched voice in the room. But so often when I think about social and emotional learning, I just focus on the E of that acronym. Think, okay, like we're focused on understanding self and the emotions around that. But your example just highlighted that no, it's a 3-word phrase, and social is a big part of this as well, right? And I feel like we get so hung up on the emotional aspect of it, and the social piece is something that can really highlight. So I appreciated that story, because it just helped me to look at it in a bigger picture as well. And it kind of squashed one of those misconceptions that I had. But I know that there are some common misconceptions surrounding SEL that you frequently encounter from educators in the community. So I'm curious, how can we first maybe identify one or two misconceptions, and then, how can we just more broadly start addressing them?
Sure. Well, we definitely touched on it earlier a little bit, how things have gotten really conflated, right? So in the broader society or within schools, because we do have, parents, guardians, caregivers, coming in with their own perspectives, and they'll sometimes think this is all these words. This is a list of words that we don't like, right? So, we think about SEL, DEI, these things have been just coming up like this is the list. That's very tricky to deal with. So we kind of talked about that, but there's also sort of that something that can be erupting from that package stuff, where the package can be good, right? The package of tips and tricks. And I've definitely used plenty and encouraged them. Like I said, Harmony is fantastic. But when that becomes like one PD session, one professional development session, and it's kind of just like presented, and then the fidelity of implementation doesn't continue, right? We don't really take it from the top with the leadership. We just kind of say, here you go, here's the cool stuff, right? And I have been very guilty of that. I do some work in gifted education, and I tend to realize that the teachers in gifted education, they like the info fast too. So I'll be like, here's some great resources, but then we never talk about a little more deeply, how are we going to use these things, right? So that's an issue, and it will lead sometimes to sort of these bad feelings like, oh, these PD sessions, they're nothing. Professional development, like, what a waste of time. I feel burnout. I feel like a lot of extra work put on me, and there's no fidelity of implementation. I have an enormous number of students, especially since the pandemic, talking about teacher burnout, teacher attrition,
Right.
emotion labor. Some of my work is focusing on emotion or emotional labor. It's both ways in the literature. So if we just pile on the PD and here's the cool ideas, which I'm very guilty, it's like throwing cool ideas at people, and we don't actually just go deeper, it can lead to this feeling of exhaustion, burnout, like, why another thing for me to do? What? And so that to me is a big issue. That's sort of a misconception that, oh no, I'm having to go to this SEL thing or this DEI thing or this whatever thing, and it's just now going to pile on top of me. There's a Disney character in Encanto who has the sister who has the stuff is just falling on her. It's drip, 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 and then she just gets very upset because all the burdens are on her, right? I feel like that's what happens to our teachers, and we don't want to do that. So
the idea of kind of the ongoing implementation, I feel like, is something that relates to any new initiative or innovation that system leaders are trying to bring online, whether it's enhancing that sense of belonging in their districts, bringing in a competency-based framework, or I've said it a few times, like this portrait of a graduate initiative. And I was talking with teachers recently, and I was asking them, when your system brings a new initiative forward, and initially you are resistant and you're trying to build this culture and climate around the initiative in your system, what is the thing that would stop you from just diving head into it? And they said, it's initiative overload. We're getting so many initiatives that we keep thinking, which one of this is going to fall off? So why am I going to reinvent my classroom for something that may stick around for one school year, maybe 2 school years, and then we just move on to the next great thing? And it directly relates to what you were mentioning of, it isn't a one and done. You don't just do one learning session and then never circle back on it. And you if you don't set school-based goals where you can have dialogue around it, then it does just become one more thing for those teachers in a system that's already overloaded.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that anecdote.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm a believer that stories can really tell a lot about these initiatives. And I know, Maggie, that with your role, you get to talk to a lot of educators who are testing and trying and learning and researching. So can you share an example or a story where a school or a student had a really transformative experience because there was a focus put on social and emotional learning?
Sure, sure. I see it with kids and adults, which is really like an aha moment for me. So, just sort of as background, I see it every day at National where, if a student comes to me, I've had them come to me in tears, something terrible has happened. I have one who's about to defend. I want to tear up thinking about the situation. And I've had several like this where this person's just been through every trial and tribulation, personal life, professional, school, you name it. And they're going to defend in about 2.5 weeks. And I am beyond elated because we were there. We said, oh gosh, something bad happened. We're here. Tell us what happened. We're here to help. We'll flex. We'll do this. We'll do that. This didn't work out here. We're going to try plan B, plan C, plan D. We're going to help you get through that. And I just seriously want to tear up thinking about that. And it has happened many times. So for me, that's that sort of whole human education thing. But with my own children, just changing to a school that was more holistic, particularly for my middle one, who's now the engineering student. She loves her Legos, she loves her engineering, and she's in a very highly ranked university now for engineering. She struggled because she was at a school where she didn't have that sense of belonging, and we changed schools. And the other school wasn't perfect. No school is perfect. But I brought them this file that was this thick. Hey, we've been to see these people, these people, these people. We've gotten this, we've got that plan, we've got that plan. They said, well, just put it aside for a second. Let's see how it goes. And they were able to meet her holistically at the time when it was most needed, when things were going really off the rails, and just brought her to where she needed to be. And then she could just blossom and bloom in this way. And so I just remember this thick thing, handing this over, like, here you go. Here's your file. And they're like, it's okay. We're just gonna put that aside for now. And let's just start with this holistic view. And that felt the burden was off of me and off of her. And it really helped. Yeah.
It just makes me think of all of these school districts that are creating these choice schools and how impactful that is going to be for the students that are going through a very similar experience where perhaps a more traditional academic pathway might not be right for them, and they have an opportunity to go and engage in something that is a different model, better suited, and to have leaders that can actually, again, talk about relationships, work to build. And what I loved about that story is two things really stood out to me, Maggie. The first one being that you were able to work with a trusted adult that in doing this work took the burden off of you. Because as a parent, I couldn't imagine, I don't have kids, but I couldn't imagine what that would be like to have that burden. And now you have a multi-tiered system to support your child, which I think is really, really critical for us to consider building. But second to that is they took the file and they put it aside and focused on your child.
That's it. And they met her where she was. Yeah.
And they're building that relationship, which I think is a really, really special thing to have experienced.
Yeah, it felt so much better. It did. It's that sense of belonging and that trust and just letting go of all that anxiety. Exactly.
And it makes me start thinking, we've talked a lot today about the critical nature of what this looks like and how we can infuse it into our classroom spaces and create these amazing spaces where students feel welcome and they have that sense of belonging. So I want to start thinking ahead and look ahead a little bit. Maggie, with all the research that you've been doing in this world, what's the future vision looking like when we talk about social and emotional learning? And how do you believe it can start to fundamentally shift our schools for the better?
Well, I'm always hopeful. I'm a glass half full person, even when things are hard, which sometimes they are right now in our world and in this country. But focusing on that classroom and school climate, I'm putting my eyes there and I'm thinking about what does that look like? We can't define it like we said a while back when we were talking. Like, it's not quantifiable exactly, but what is a beautiful, nurturing, engaging school and classroom climate where that kid gets up every day or that adult learner gets up every day? Could be online classroom for an adult doctoral student, right? And they go, cool, I want to do this. I feel good. That's literally it. And so I started teasing that out because I'm writing some curriculum right now and it's not fully baked yet. But I was thinking about some things, communication, how we communicate. It's not just the exact words we say or write, but it's how we do it. So things like pragmatics and all these linguistic constructs of communication that maybe we're not thinking about, that how we say things is important. I get text messages and I don't know how to read the tone sometimes, and it's like, we got to be careful.
All the time.
right? You got to be careful with that. So this is something to think about. Critical thinking, thinking about it differently, like I said earlier, and that classroom culture and climate. I think if we can find and maintain some of these places where beautiful things are happening, like I said about those less commonly taught content areas, right? The band room, the music room for you and me, classroom for my oldest. My oldest struggled with some things, and the art classroom was that Oasis, visual art. Sometimes it's sports, sometimes it's other things, like I said, engineering course. But how do we nurture those? And we end up cutting them instead of nurturing them. That's what we do. So how can we avoid that? Because we are really cutting off our nose to spite our face when we do that.
That could be an entirely different episode when we talk about the importance of the extracurricular classrooms and what that's bringing in. And I know that there are pockets and there are hubs and great organizations that are advocating for these things. But I'm with you 100%. Each one of our students is bringing an experience to that building, and they're going to find that oasis in one of those classrooms, and every classroom that's there is priority, and that becomes hard to balance. And I know that there's been such a forced focus on numeracy and literacy in our schools these days, and yes, those are 100% a really strong focus, and they should remain a strong focus for students, but we can't forget about the other areas that are going to help foster those transferable skills. Can you learn things like collaboration and communication in literacy and numeracy? Of course you can, with intentionality. But I always talk and say, when I was in those extracurricular art environments, as somebody who did it both in and outside of school, I learned so much more about and being a part of those than just the subject of learning music at that time. I learned how to critically think. I learned so much about collaboration and leadership and how to non-verbally communicate with those around me. And there's so many things that are rich and meaningful. So I just love that call out, because I could talk for hours about the importance.
Yes, I agree completely.
But Maggie, for those that are listening and have stuck around through this episode, what advice would you give to education leaders who recognize the critical importance of social and emotional learning, but may feel a little bit overwhelmed by the prospect of implementing this effectively in their system, in their buildings, or in their classrooms?
Sure. You definitely touched on that earlier when you said sort of like baby steps, right? Start small. I always think about that, just a little bit can get the ball rolling. Maybe your colleague across the hall says, "Oh, look at that. Look at the joy that I see over there. Or look at the interesting thing that I'm curious. I want to learn about this, right? What's happening?" And so that little thing, and collaborating with others in that. So I'll bring in a Disney reference again, and it's very Gen X millennial, but there's a character called Figment, and he has a song. It's One Little Spark, right? One Little Spark. And it's about imagination and about creativity and about, innovation. But I think you could say it's one little spark for those things too. It's contagious, right? If you have a spark of joy, if you have a spark of, curiosity, if you have a spark of kindness and empathy, and someone else sees that, it really can be quite contagious if we're just open to do that. And so it's when we close off things and we say, no, the spark just will die, right? So I really like the spark. I'm going to take Figment's quote there and give a citation, Figment, to say that the spark, because it's one little spark, but it can be more than just that. It can be from your disposition and from your heart. Right.
And getting the opportunity, Maggie, to chat with you for the last 40 odd minutes here so far today. There's obviously a really deep underlying passion about educating others around this critical curriculum and approach to our education system. And when we think about, social and emotional learning, fostering it, creating the sense of belonging, what is it about this that's truly igniting your spark to keep you so passionate to keep moving forward in this work?
Yeah, it's exactly that with the spark. So what I do, I find I'm really honored to be able to do this from various levels. So I've always loved teaching kids. I've always loved teaching, K-12. And then I started teaching teachers. And now a lot of what I do is sort of helping people as they do research and they get involved in that. And so I think bringing that all together is exciting for me. So I run our Advanced Research Center, which is just a place where we help faculty, alumni, students, and staff sort of find each other if they want to do research together about education, if they want to just have someone to talk with about it so they're not isolated, because it's an online, academic environment. And it's the idea that you're connecting people together and then helping them find their path, right? So it's the same thing. It's still just teaching, but within that. So I heard a phrase once, and I think I heard this involving sort of like people who do good in the world in all kinds of spaces. It could be in politics, it could be in anything, in teaching and medicine. But planting trees knowing you'll never sit in their shade is the phrase that I heard somewhere. And I don't know who the quote is from. I'm going to have to find out. But I've heard it in various contexts. But you know that you want to plant that really strong tree, and it's going to take a really long time. You may never be the one to enjoy that full, the fruit and the shade and all these things, but someone else will. And knowing that really is a beautiful thing. So that's sort of what connects all these things,
It's a great summary of our conversation today, Maggie. And I love that quote. If you find out who said that quote, shoot me an email, let me know, because I think it's something that we can all kind of keep in the forefront. But with all that said, today, it was so amazing getting to chat and to talk about creating, holding, and spreading the spark so that we can make sure every single one of our students in K-12 education has a sense of belonging within our schools to foster the best of themselves. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us here today on the show.
Thanks so much, Jordan. It's my pleasure.
That was Associate Professor, Academic Program Director, and Faculty Lead for Social and Emotional Learning for National University, Dr. Maggie Broderick. Hey, thanks for listening to the show, and please make sure to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. I'm Jordan Lewis, and you've been listening to the Growth Over Grades podcast.